Bolivia's interim president Inés has signed in legislation to annul the uncontested October election. She has also paved the way for a new vote without former President Evo Morales, which comes as a breakthrough in the ongoing political crisis. The bill comes amid anti-government demonstrators lifted roadblocks to hold talks with Inés. The two sides aimed at ending weeks of unrest that has left more than 30 dead in clashes with security forces. Romania centrist President Klaus Iohannis has won the presidential election runoff. He crushed his socialist challenger with a pledge to resume judicial reforms slowed down by successive social democrat governments. Romania, a European Union member state, has rolled back anti-corruption measures in recent years. Along with ex-communist peers, Poland and Hungary, it has been heavily criticized by Brussels for its actions. However, 60-year-old has been credited by Western allies and the European Union with trying to protect the rule of law. The former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, has formally announced his campaign for president in 2020 U.S. elections. The 77-year-old media mogul announced his candidacy in a written statement posted on a campaign website. Voters in Uruguay are heading to the polls in a presidential election that is likely to end the center-left's 15-year rule. Exit polls suggest that center-right candidate is leading the presidential election. In fact, Luis Poe is a conservative lawyer whose father is a former president. Some 2.7 million Uruguayans voters are casting their votes. The first round of results are expected to be announced an hour after voting concludes. That is tomorrow morning, and amid wider regional unrest in Bolivia and Chile, Uruguay remains stable. Guinea-Bissau began counting ballots by hand on Sunday as voting seemingly passed without major incident. Election has been marred by weeks of political chaos that sparked protest and a deadlocked parliament. President Jose Mario Vaz, 61-year-old, is seeking re-election for a second term and remains popular among cashew nut farmers. Vaz faces stiff opposition mainly from former Prime Minister Domingos Pereira, who is considered a modernizer. He's also promised to expand the health and education sector and has made himself popular among younger voters. Results will be announced on November 28th.
José Mário Vaz.
Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has warned the global community against taking its eyes off Russian aggression and Ukraine Gate. It's being seen as a reference to the impeachment inquiry consuming Washington. He said in a statement that one person is interested in this inquiry and that person sits in Russia. This could be a reference to Russian President Putin. The former Ukrainian leader also advocated for Ukraine's integration into the European Union, calling it one of the most European optimistic nations. UK Prime Minister and Conservative Party leader Boris Johnson has unveiled his party's election manifesto for the December 12th election. Johnson's manifesto promises not to increase the taxes if the Conservatives win the election. It also pledges to get Brexit done by January 31st, 2020 if voted back to power. Other guarantees include tighter immigration control, zero net carbon emissions by 2050 and no increases in income tax and VAT rates. Johnson has described the 59-page manifesto as a partial blueprint for the future of the country. Hong Kong pro-democracy candidates held a significant lead in initial returns after residents turned out in huge numbers to vote in district council elections following 6 months of anti-government protests. Ballot counting was set to continue until the early hours of today for an election that some analysts say have become a proxy vote for support for the government of the Chinese-ruled territory. Kelvin Lam, the stand-in for pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, who was banned from participating in the election, won decisively over establishment candidate Judy Chan in the South Horizon's West constituency. A record 1,000 candidates are vying for 452 seats, and a record 4.1 million people have enrolled to vote. Two pro-democracy protesters who barricaded themselves in Hong Kong Polytechnic University campus for 9 days have surrendered themselves to the police. Flanked by mediators, the anti-government demonstrators walked out of the campus before they were taken into police custody. Most of the protesters who took over the campus grounds a week earlier had left before the weekend. However, an unknown number remained at the university for days, hoping to avoid arrest. Hundreds of protesters have been arrested during the siege in the past week. Thousands marched in the Belgian capital to protest against violence towards women. The march, which police estimated was attended by over 10,000 people, was held on the eve of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The march stopped in front of Brussels courthouse, where pairs of shoes painted in red had been displayed to represent women killed in the country since 2017. According to a protester, 99 women have been victims of femicide in Belgium since 2017. More rallies are scheduled today. Black smoke filled the air as protesters burned tires to block main roads in the Iraqi city of Basra. Protesters were expressing their anger at poor services and shortages, despite religious and political leaders calling for calm. Basra has been facing chronic shortages of clean water and acute power shortages, leaving residents with only a few hours of electricity per day. At least 3 protesters were killed and 70 others injured as the confrontation took a violent turn. At least one foreigner has been reported killed in the Afghan capital after a UN vehicle was targeted in a bombing. Officials have said that 5 others, including 2 Afghan UN workers, were wounded in the attack. It's being said that the vehicle was heavily damaged. A blast targeted the vehicle on one of the busiest roads in the city. However, no one immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. Both the Taliban and Islamic State group are active in the capital and have repeatedly claimed previous attacks. First Honduran migrants sent back to Central America under new restrictions pushed by U.S. President Trump expressed resignation at his failure to join relatives living in the U.S. The 23-year-old farm worker spent 3 days at the U.S. border city of El Paso, Texas. The deal allows U.S. immigration officials to force migrants requesting asylum at the U.S.-Mexican border to first apply for asylum in countries through which they traveled. Now, finding himself in Guatemala with an offer for asylum there, the migrant has decided that it was best to return to his hometown in Honduras. A man from Niger who was shot in the foot while in Libya was among a group of 11 migrants evacuated from the open arms rescue vessel in the 5 bodies, all women, were retrieved off the coast of southern Italian island of Lampedusa after the boat capsized in bad sea conditions. The Coast Guard said 3 bodies were retrieved at sea and 2 other bodies were recovered on land. 10-meter-long vessel was rescued by the Coast Guard after it was reported in distress less than 1 mile off Lampedusa. Coast Guard's tax police and Navy units are continuing searches, but bad weather is complicating this effort. 2 people were found dead in the massive flooding that was hit southeastern France since Friday, causing major damage in the region. Local authorities said 1 person was found dead and between the towns, and another body was found in a car in the nearby village. Several rivers burst their banks in southeastern France, causing major damage. Several homes were flooded, and trees and cars and boats were swept along by the waters. Floods have been continuing since Friday but are expected to subside soon. Venice was hit by high water levels on Sunday, bringing the lagoon city virtually to its knees. The inundation left the famous St. Mark's Square shut as the peak tide level reached up to 130 centimeters. Venice residents were forced to water through the floods, and weeks of rains and wind has caused the city to flood multiple times. The city, famous for its canals, was hit by a high tide at 187 centimeters on the 12th of November as well. A portion of a motorway bridge connecting the coastal city of Savona to Turin collapsed. The collapse followed a massive landslide caused by bad weather, which hit the bridge from a nearby mountain. Heavy rains have caused widespread flooding in northern Italy this month. No casualties have been reported so far. The toll road operator is carrying out investigations to assess the situation. 50-meter-long viaduct was located just outside Savona. Motorway circulation was stopped in both directions, though just one of the 2 carriageways collapsed. At least 26 people were killed after a small plane crashed in the heavily populated city of Goma in Congo. The Dornier 228 aircraft, operated by a local company called Busy Bee, crashed during takeoff for a flight to the city of Beni. It crashed into a residential area near the Goma airport. The city's provincial governor's office said that all the bodies had been recovered from the rubble, and there was no survivors left in the plane.